The smell of disaster is distinct. Most people think it smells like smoke or gasoline or something rotting in the summer heat. But in the high-stakes world of luxury event planning, absolute catastrophe has a very specific scent: stargazer lilies and impending lawsuits. The day Stellar Reyes' life imploded began with the sun rising over the Hamptons like a gold coin tossed into a velvet sky. It was supposed to be the coronation of her career. The Vance Holloway wedding, 300 guests, a budget that could have funded a small island nation's infrastructure for a decade. And Stella, the 27-year-old rising star of the Manhattan circuit, was holding the conductor's baton. She stood at the edge of the great lawn, adjusting the earpiece that felt like a permanent extension of her body. The Atlantic Ocean was behaving itself, providing a gentle, rhythmic crash against the dunes that didn't overpower the string quartet. The tent was a masterpiece of structural engineering and sheer vanity, a cathedral of white silk and crystal chandeliers suspended over perfectly manicured grass. Stella, came the voice of her assistant, panicked and tinny in her ear. "The bride is asking for you. She says something is wrong with the light." Stella checked her watch. A Patek Philippe she had bought herself after the solstice gala bonus. It was 10 a.m. The ceremony wasn't until 4. Tell her the lighting is calibrated to mimic the golden hour regardless of the actual cloud cover, Stella said, her voice maintaining the professional baritone reserved for hysterical clients. Tell her she will look like an angel filtered through Instagram's finest preset. I'm on my way. She walked through the venue, her clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. She looked invincible. She saw the world in grids and timelines. The waiters were setting the tables with the precision of a bomb squad. The floral arrangements were massive clouds of white hydrangeas and peonies, specifically peonies, imported from Holland because the bride, a fragile socialite named Clarissa, was deathly allergic to lilies. Stella stopped at table 4. A fork was 3 millimeters out of alignment. She nudged it with her thumb. Perfect. This was the job. It wasn't just planning parties. It was architectural emotional manipulation. She created moments. She engineered memories. She was the invisible hand that made sure the champagne was always cold and the lighting always flattering. And then the wind changed. It started with a scream. Not a playful bridesmaid just saw the groom scream. A primal horror movie scream that ripped through the silk walls of the tent. Stella broke into a run, her heels sinking slightly into the turf. She burst into the bridal suite, a temporary structure that cost more than most people's homes. Clarissa was standing in the center of the room, clawing at her neck. Her face, usually a canvas of porcelain perfection, was swelling rapidly, turning a violent shade of crimson. Her eyes were terrified slits. "I can't breathe," she wheezed. And then Stella saw them, everywhere. Instead of the white peonies she had ordered, approved, and double-checked at the depot at 4 a.m., the room was filled with stargazer lilies, hundreds of them. Their heavy, sweet perfume was suffocating, thick enough to chew on. "Get the EpiPen," Stella shouted, dropping her clipboard. "Get the medic now. Who put these here?" The maid of honor shrieked, pointing at a massive vase of the toxic flowers. "Stella, you knew she was allergic." "I didn't order these," Stella said, her hands shaking as she grabbed the vase to throw it out the door. "Check the invoice. I ordered peonies." But the invoice on the table, the one sitting right next to the signed contract, didn't say peonies. It said lilies, in bold black ink. And at the bottom, in handwriting that looked terrifyingly like hers, was a signature, Stella's signature. "I didn't sign this," she whispered, the blood draining from her face. But nobody was listening. The medics were rushing in. The bride was being loaded onto a stretcher, her custom Vera Wang dress being cut open to facilitate breathing. Chaos is a domino effect. Once the first tile falls, the rest follow with terrifying speed. As they wheeled the gasping bride out, Stella turned to the catering station. The head chef was pale, sweating through his whites. "Stella," he said, his voice trembling. "The refrigeration truck, the power cut out." "When?" she demanded. "Hours ago. The sensors were hacked. They were looped to show normal temperatures. We just opened the back, the lobster, the caviar, it's all warm. It's spoiled. We have 300 guests arriving in an hour and no food." Her phone began to vibrate, then the walkie-talkie. Then the PA system squealed with feedback. Stella ran out of the tent, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She needed to fix this. She could fix this. She could order emergency pizzas. She could turn it into a chic, ironic statement. She stopped. Standing at the entrance of the tent was her boss, Julian Thorne, the owner of Thorne Events. He was standing with the bride's father, a senator with a temper famous for ending careers. Julian looked at her. There was no sympathy in his eyes, only a cold, calculated distancing. "Stella," Julian said, his voice projecting clearly so the gathering crowd of early guests could hear. "What have you done?" "Julian, I didn't," she started, stepping forward. "The flowers were swapped. The truck was hacked. This is sabotage." "Sabotage." The senator roared, his face purple. "My daughter is in an ambulance because of your incompetence. You signed the order. We have the paper." "I didn't." "You're fired," Julian said. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The words landed like lead weights. "Get off the property, Stella, before I have security remove you. You are a liability. You are dangerous, and I will make sure everyone in New York knows it." Stella looked around, 300 faces, the staff she had trained, the vendors she had vetted. They were all looking at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. But then she saw something else. Just beyond the perimeter of the crowd, near the edge of the rose garden, a figure was standing in the shadows of a weeping willow. A woman. She was holding a phone, recording. She wasn't looking at the bride. She wasn't looking at the senator. She was looking at Stella, and she was smiling. A cold, satisfied smile that chilled Stella more than the ocean breeze. Stella blinked, and the woman turned, disappearing into the hedgerow like smoke. "Go," Julian barked. Stella walked away. She left her clipboard in the grass. She left her reputation in the dirt. And as she walked down the long, gravel driveway, the sound of the ocean was replaced by the sound of her career shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Cut to 8 months later. If hell had a waiting room, it would look exactly like the service corridor of the Miami Convention Center. It smelled of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and the quiet desperation of people who spend their lives being invisible. Raise, pick up the pace. Her manager, a man named Gary who wore a toupee that looked like a frightened hamster clinging to his scalp, snapped his fingers at her. "I'm going, Gary," Stella said, adjusting the tray of champagne flutes balanced on her left hand. "I was just checking the glasses for spots." "Nobody cares about spots," Gary sneered. "They care about the booze. Get out there and smile. You look like you're at a funeral." "I am," Stella muttered under her breath as she walked away. "I'm mourning my dignity." She pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped into the ballroom. The humidity of Miami hit her first, even indoors. It was a corporate mixer for a pharmaceutical company. The theme appeared to be undersea fantasy, which apparently meant draping blue fishing nets over the chandeliers and forcing the waitstaff to wear turquoise vests that were 2 sizes too small. Stella moved through the crowd like a ghost. That was the trick to being a server. You had to be present enough to offer a drink, but absent enough that no one actually looked at you. You were furniture. You were a tray with legs. Champagne. She asked the group of men in ill-fitting suits. "Yeah, hit me," one said, grabbing a glass without making eye contact. He spilled a little on the floor. Stella watched the droplet hit the carpet. Her eyes automatically scanned the room. It was a habit she couldn't break. The curse of competence. The flow is wrong, she thought, her brain dissecting the event against her will. The bar is too close to the entrance, creating a bottleneck. The lighting is too harsh. It's highlighting the wrinkles on the donors instead of smoothing them out. and the band is playing jazz at a tempo that suggests they are double parked and in a hurry. It was amateur hour. It made her teeth itch. She moved toward the back of the room, needing a moment of respite near the busing station. There was a large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall above the bar, currently muted, playing the 24-hour news cycle. Stella set her tray down and rubbed her wrist. 8 months of carrying trays had given her carpal tunnel and a burning hatred for the general public. She looked up at the screen. The chyron at the bottom screamed in breaking news red. The event of the season, Ashford engagement rumors swirl. And there he was, Dominic Ashford. Even on a blurry 1080p screen, the man was offensive. Offensively handsome. Offensively rich. He was walking out of a courthouse, surrounded by a phalanx of security guards, ignoring a mob of reporters. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him with a kind of architectural precision that suggested it cost more than Stella's entire year's salary. His face was a study in controlled indifference. Sharp jawline, dark hair cut with military precision, and eyes that looked like they were made of polished obsidian. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He looked like a man who found the entire concept of human interaction to be a tedious inefficiency. "Look at him," a voice said beside her. It was Maria, another server. She was fanning herself with a cocktail napkin. "El Príncipe de Hilo," she sighed. "The Ice Prince. God, he is beautiful. I heard he's finally getting engaged to that Langley girl, the heiress." Victoria Langley, Stella said, the name tasting like sour milk. She knew the Langleys. She had planned Victoria's sweet 16 back when she was an intern. The girl had screamed at her because the chocolate fountain was the wrong shade of brown. "Yeah, her," Maria said. "Imagine marrying him. Imagine having that much money. You'd never have to carry a tray again." Stella looked at Dominic Ashford's frozen expression on the screen. "He looks like he's going to a merger, not a marriage," Stella observed dryly. "That's just how the rich are, Stella," Maria shrugged. "They don't marry for love. They marry for, I don't know, stocks, real estate, power," Stella corrected. "They marry for power. It's a transaction. He buys her family's connections. She buys his brand. It's not a wedding. It's an acquisition strategy with a white dress." The camera cut to a shot of the venue, the Ashford Grand Hotel, the jewel of the Miami skyline, a monolithic tower of glass and steel that rose from the ocean like a modern-day Atlantis. 72 hours, the news anchor's caption read. "The countdown to the Ashford Gala begins. I heard the budget is $2 million, Maria whispered. $2 million for one night." Stella felt a familiar pang in her chest, a mixture of jealousy and nausea. $2 million. She could have done wonders with $2 million. She could have built a world. Instead, she was scraping shrimp tails off plates and dodging the wandering hands of drunk pharmaceutical reps. "Raise." Gary barked from across the room. "Stop staring at the TV and serve table 6. They're dry." "Coming, Gary," she called back, her voice flat. She took one last look at the screen. The camera had zoomed in on Dominic Ashford's face. For a split second, Stella thought she saw something behind the mask of indifference. A flicker of exhaustion, a shadow of doubt. No, she was projecting. Men like Dominic Ashford didn't have doubts. They had portfolios. She picked up her tray, loaded it with fresh glasses, and turned back to the room. "Enjoy your $2 million party, Mr. Ashford," she whispered to the empty air. "I hope your wedding planner checked the flowers." The transition from New York royalty to Miami help hadn't just been a change in tax brackets. It was a fundamental rewriting of Stella's DNA. In New York, she walked fast. She talked fast. She wore black. She was somebody. In Miami, the heat slowed everything down. It made the air thick and the ambition sticky. She lived in a studio apartment in Little Havana that smelled perpetually of fried plantains and her neighbor's cigar smoke. Her wardrobe had devolved from tailored blazers to polyester uniforms that scratched her neck. But the worst part wasn't the poverty. It wasn't the heat. It was the brain atrophy. She could feel her mind dulling. Her photographic memory, once used to track the dietary restrictions of European royalty, was now used to remember that the guy at table 9 wanted his gin and tonic with 2 limes, not 1. "Excuse me, miss." Stella snapped out of her daze. A woman in a sequin dress was snapping her fingers at her. "Yes, ma'am. This quiche is cold," the woman said, holding out a half-eaten appetizer like it was a dead rodent. Stella looked at the mini quiche. It was supposed to be room temperature. It was a savory tart, not a hot pocket. "I apologize," Stella said, taking the napkin from her hand. "I can bring you a fresh one." "Don't bother," the woman huffed, turning her back. "Just get me another Chardonnay and make it a heavy pour. This party is a snooze. Right away." Stella walked toward the bar, her heels clicking on the marble floor. 1, 2, 3, 4. She counted her steps. It was a grounding technique. Don't throw the tray, don't scream. Don't tell her that her dress is a knockoff Alexander McQueen from the 2018 Resort Collection and it pulls terribly across the bust. She reached the service bar and dumped the rejected quiche into the trash. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She knew who it was without looking. Her landlord. She was 3 days late on rent. Again. She needed this job. She needed the overtime. She needed to swallow her pride until it choked her, because the alternative was moving back to Ohio and admitting to her mother that she was right, that New York had eaten her alive. "Hey, Stella," the bartender, a nice kid named Leo, slid a glass of Chardonnay across the bar. "You okay? You look like you want to murder someone." "Just visualizing world peace, Leo," she said, grabbing the glass. "One heavy pour at a time." "Hey, did you hear about the Ashford gig?" Leo asked, wiping down the counter. Stella paused. "What about it?" "Our company got the contract for the rehearsal dinner catering," he said, grinning. "Well, the auxiliary catering. The main stuff is being done by some fancy French chef, but they need extra hands for the cocktail hour. Gary is picking the crew tonight." Stella's heart did a traitorous little flip. The Ashford Grand. It was the pinnacle of Miami hospitality. Even if she was just passing hors d'oeuvres, being inside that building, seeing how the machinery worked at that level, it was like a recovering junkie hearing about a really high-quality stash. "Does it pay extra?" she asked, pretending to be casual. "Double time," Leo said. "And the tips, forget about it. These are billionaires, Stella. They tip accidentally. Double time, that would cover rent. That would cover the electric bill. That would buy her another month of pretending she was going to figure this out." "Tell Gary I'm in," she said. Leo winked. "Already did. He said you're grumpy, but you don't drop things. You're on the list." She didn't drop things. The irony tasted bitter on her tongue. She had dropped the biggest ball in New York City. She had dropped her entire life. But Leo was right. She didn't drop trays. She took the Chardonnay and headed back into the fray. The news on the TV had cycled back to Dominic Ashford. The footage showed him walking into the Ashford Grand, looking up at the soaring atrium of his hotel. For a second the camera caught his eyes again. And this time Stella recognized the look. It wasn't exhaustion, and it wasn't doubt. It was hunger, not for food and not for love. It was the look of a man who was building something massive, something that required every ounce of his soul, and he was terrified that one wrong move would bring it all crashing down. Stella knew that look. She used to see it in the mirror every morning. "Don't worry, Mr. Ashford," she muttered, dodging a dancing couple. "If your party falls apart, at least you have a golden parachute. The rest of us just hit the pavement." She didn't know it yet, but the parachute had already been cut. And in 72 hours, Dominic Ashford and Stella Reyes were going to hit the pavement together. The only question was whether they would bounce or splatter. The Ashford Grand Hotel did not just occupy space in Miami. It dominated it, standing at the edge of Biscayne Bay. It was a 50-story monolith of tempered glass and white stone, designed to look like a wave frozen at the precise moment before it crashes. It was a building that whispered money. Not the loud, flashy new crypto money that raced Lamborghinis down Collins Avenue, but the old, quiet, terrifying money that moved governments and silenced scandals. Inside the atrium, the air was kept at a crisp 68 degrees, a defiance of the tropical humidity outside. It smelled of white tea, ozone, and the kind of leather that had never seen a cow. Dominic Ashford walked through the lobby with the stride of a man who owned every square inch of the floor beneath his feet, because he did. He checked his phone. 3 missed calls from the board of directors, 2 emails from his lawyers regarding the prenuptial agreement, 1 text from Victoria asking if he preferred the beluga caviar or the ostra for the raw bar. He didn't care about the caviar. He cared about the structural integrity of the merger that this engagement represented. Mr. Ashford, a voice fluttered beside him. It was Miranda Chen, the event planner. She was a petite woman in her 40s with a resume that included 2 royal weddings and a presidential inauguration. Usually she was a machine of efficiency. Today, she looked like she was vibrating. "The ballroom is prepped for the final lighting check," Miranda said, her voice tight. She was clutching her tablet so hard her knuckles were white, and the florists are setting up the mock centerpieces. Dominic stopped. He turned to look at her. His eyes, dark and analytical, scanned her face. He noticed the slight tremor in her hands. He noticed the way her eyes darted to the exits every few seconds. "Miranda," Dominic said, his voice low, "you're shaking." Miranda jumped, forcing a brittle smile. "Just pregame jitters, Mr. Ashford. It's a big event, the biggest of the season." "It's a dinner party with a press release," Dominic corrected, continuing his walk toward the ballroom doors. "Don't overthink it. As long as the press gets their photos and the Langleys get their egos stroked, the night is a success." He pushed open the double doors of the grand ballroom. The space was cavernous, a sea of polished marble and gold leaf. But right now it felt empty, cold. Dominic looked up at the ceiling where technicians were suspended on rigs adjusting the massive crystal chandeliers. This hotel was his life's work. It was the flagship of the Ashford legacy, and in 72 hours he was going to sell a piece of his soul to keep it. "Dominic, darling." The voice cut through the air like a diamond cutter on glass. High, polished, and sharp, Victoria Langley emerged from the shadows near the stage. She was wearing a white sundress that cost more than most cars, and her blonde hair was blow-dried to a level of perfection that defied physics. She moved across the floor with the practiced grace of a pageant queen or a predator. She didn't hug Dominic. She placed a hand on his lapel, staking a claim. It was a gesture for the cameras, even though there were no cameras here yet. "You're late," Victoria said, smiling. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were blue ice, constantly assessing, calculating, weighing. "I was running the numbers on the Tokyo expansion," Dominic said, stepping back slightly. "Hello, Victoria." Victoria turned her gaze to Miranda. The smile dropped 3 degrees in temperature. "Miranda," Victoria said, "I thought we discussed the linens." Miranda flinched. "Yes, Ms. Langley. We went with the dove gray silk as you requested." Victoria walked over to a sample table, picked up a napkin, and dropped it as if it were contaminated. "It looks dingy," Victoria sighed, looking at Dominic. "Doesn't it look dingy, Dom? It looks like something you'd find in a motel. I specifically said platinum gray. There is a difference." I can change it," Miranda stammered, tapping frantically on her tablet. "I'll call the vendor. It might be a rush fee, but—" "No," Dominic interrupted. His voice was calm, but it carried authority. "The linens are fine. Nobody is looking at the napkins, Victoria. They're looking at the stock price." Victoria's jaw tightened just for a fraction of a second. Then the mask slipped back into place. "Of course, darling," she cooed, smoothing his tie. "You're so practical. That's why Daddy loves you, but I care. This is our engagement. It has to be perfect. If Miranda can't handle the details." She let the sentence hang in the air. a threat wrapped in velvet. Miranda looked sick. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down at the screen and all the color drained from her face. Dominic saw it. He saw the terror. "Miranda," he asked, "is everything all right?" I need to take this," Miranda whispered. "Vendor emergency, excuse me." She turned and practically ran out of the ballroom, her heels clacking frantically against the marble. Dominic watched her go, a frown creasing his forehead. He had worked with Miranda for 5 years. She didn't have vendor emergencies she couldn't handle. She didn't run. "She seems unstable," Victoria commented lightly, picking a piece of lint off her dress. "Maybe we should have gone with that firm from New York. You know, the one Preston recommended." At the mention of Preston, Dominic went still. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. "We are not hiring Preston Cole's people," Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet. "Preston is not allowed in this building. Does your father understand that, Victoria?" Victoria laughed, a tinkling, hollow sound. "Oh, Dom, you hold grudges so tightly. It's bad for your blood pressure. Preston just wants to see us happy." "Preston wants to see me bankrupt," Dominic said. "If I see him near this gala, the merger is off." He turned and walked away, leaving Victoria standing alone in the middle of the empty ballroom. Victoria watched him leave. Her smile slowly faded, replaced by a look of pure, concentrated malice. She pulled out her own phone and typed a quick message. "He's suspicious, but he has no idea." 10 floors down in the employee parking garage, Miranda Chen was having a panic attack. She sat in her Honda Civic, the engine idling, the air conditioning blasting against her sweat-drenched face. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. On the screen was a text message from an unknown number. There were no words, just a picture. It was a photo taken through a window. It showed Miranda's living room, her cat sleeping on the sofa, and on the coffee table a stack of cash, thick bundles of $100 bills. Then a second message popped up. "We know you took the bribe. If you don't disappear tonight, we send the photos to the police." And to Dominic Ashford, Miranda sobbed, a choked, ugly sound. She hadn't wanted to take the money, but they knew about her debts. They knew about her sick mother. A man with a voice like gravel had called her 3 weeks ago. He told her exactly which vendors to hire. He told her to book the florist with the bad reputation. He told her to accidentally leave the catering contract unsigned until the last minute. He told her to sabotage Dominic Ashford. And now they were done with her. She looked at the rearview mirror. Was that a black SUV parked near the exit? Was someone watching her? Panic, primal and overwhelming, seized her. She couldn't go back upstairs. She couldn't face Dominic if he found out she had betrayed him. Dominic Ashford destroyed his enemies. He didn't just fire them, he erased them, but the people blackmailing her, they were worse. Miranda threw the car into reverse. Tires squealed on the concrete. She drove too fast down the spiral ramp, scraping the side of her car against a pillar, but she didn't stop. She burst out into the blinding Miami sunlight and merged into traffic, heading north, away from the hotel, away from the gala, away from the $2 million disaster waiting to happen. She drove for 20 minutes until she reached a nondescript strip mall. She pulled behind a dumpster. With trembling fingers, she took out the SIM card from her phone. She snapped it in half. Then she took the phone itself and smashed it against the brick wall of the alley. Once, twice, until the screen was a spiderweb of shattered glass and the metal casing bent. She threw the pieces into the dumpster. "I'm sorry, Dominic," she whispered to the humid air. "I'm so sorry." She got back into her car and drove. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't be Miranda Chen anymore. Back at the hotel, night had fallen. The Ashford Grand glowed like a beacon against the dark ocean. Dominic sat in his penthouse office on the top floor. The room was a sanctuary of glass and steel, suspended above the city. He was looking at a digital blueprint of the new hotel chain, the Ashford Community Project. His mother's dream. Hotels that funded local schools, that provided job training, that revitalized neighborhoods instead of gentrifying them. It was the only thing that mattered, the only reason he was marrying a woman he tolerated into a family he despised. His head of security, Marcus Webb, stood by the door. Marcus was a mountain of a man, an ex-Navy SEAL who spoke rarely and smiled never. "You haven't eaten," Marcus said. "I'm not hungry," Dominic replied, not looking up from the screen. "Where is Miranda? We were supposed to review the final guest list at 7. "She's not answering her cell," Marcus said. "I checked the security logs. Her car left the garage at 2:14 p.m. She was driving erratically." Dominic spun his chair around. "She left in the middle of the day, and she left her laptop," Marcus added. He stepped forward and placed a silver MacBook on Dominic's desk. "Found it in the ballroom prep area, unlocked." Dominic opened the laptop. The screen showed the event schedule, but as he clicked through the files, he realized something was wrong. The vendor contacts were deleted. The seating charts were corrupted. The catering orders were blank. "What is this?" Dominic murmured. "It looks like a wipe," Marcus said grimly, "or a purge. Someone tried to delete the trail. Is she?" Dominic hesitated. "Is she hurt?" "I don't know," Marcus said, "but I sent a patrol unit to her apartment. The door was unlocked, place was tossed, clothes missing, cat left behind." Dominic stood up and walked to the window, the city lights reflected in his eyes. "She ran," Dominic said. "Why would she run?" "Fear," Marcus said simply, "or guilt." "Guilt. We found this in the trash folder of her email." Marcus tapped a key. "A draft to the catering company. The subject line is cancellation." Dominic felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "The gala is in 48 hours, Dominic said. "We have 500 guests, senators, investors, the press, and we have no planner. And possibly no catering," Marcus added. Dominic slammed his hand against the reinforced glass of the window. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "Victoria," he snarled, "you think she's involved?" "I think chaos benefits her," Dominic said. "If the gala fails, the stock dips. Her father buys more shares at a discount. They get more control. It's a classic squeeze." "We can't prove it," Marcus warned. "I don't need to prove it." Dominic turned back, his face a mask of cold determination. "I need to fix it. If I cancel this gala, the rumors start. Ashford is unstable. The merger is shaky. The stock tanks anyway. I cannot cancel." "So what do we do?" Marcus asked. "Miranda took all the logistics with her. We are blind." Dominic looked at the empty laptop. Then he looked at the city below. Somewhere down there among the millions of lights was the answer, or the end of his career. "Find me the catering company," Dominic ordered. "The one Miranda was trying to cancel. Get them here tomorrow morning. I want to see every plate, every glass, every member of their staff. If Miranda is gone, we do it ourselves." "Dominic," Marcus said softly, "we build hotels. We don't plan parties." "How hard can it be?" Dominic asked. "It's just dinner." Famous last words down in the city. In a cramped apartment in Little Havana, Stella Reyes was ironing her uniform. The fabric was cheap and stiff. The steam rose up, curling her hair. She didn't know that the architect of her destruction, Miranda Chen, was currently crossing the state line into Georgia. She didn't know that the man on the TV, the Ice Prince, was currently standing in a glass tower, staring into the abyss of a public relations nightmare. She just knew she had a double shift tomorrow at the Ashford Grand. She held up the uniform, a black vest, a white shirt, a bow tie. It was a costume of servitude. "Just one more day," Stella whispered to herself. "Make the rent, survive the night, don't look at the flowers." She turned off the iron. Fate, however, had other plans. Fate was already mixing the cocktail of disaster, a missing planner, a desperate billionaire, a clumsy waitress, and a stray cable on a marble floor. The stage was set. The players were moving into position, and the fall was going to be spectacular. 48 hours. In the world of logistics, 48 hours is a lifetime. You can fly around the world in 48 hours. You can topple a small government. You can definitely plan a dinner party. But in the world of high-stakes corporate warfare, 48 hours without a general is a death sentence. The executive conference room of the Ashford Grand looked less like a meeting space and more like the site of a plane crash investigation. Papers were strewn across the mahogany table. Empty coffee cups built precarious skylines on the coasters. The air was thick with the smell of stressed sweat and expensive cologne. Dominic Ashford stood at the head of the table, his hands pressed flat against the wood. He was staring at the empty spot where Miranda Chen should have been. "Let me get this straight," Dominic said, his voice dangerously low. "We have 500 guests arriving in 2 days. We have the vice president's wife on the seating chart. We have 3 Michelin star chefs flying in from Paris. And we have no run of show, no vendor contacts, no timeline." Marcus Webb, the head of security, looked grim. He looked like a man who would rather be defusing a bomb than delivering this news. Miranda's cloud backups were wiped. Marcus said, "It was a professional job. We're trying to recover the data, but the encryption is aggressive. Whoever did this didn't just want her gone, they wanted to burn the bridge behind her." "We are flying blind," Dominic muttered, running a hand through his hair. It was the first crack in his composure. "Dominic, darling," Victoria sighed from the corner of the room. She was examining her manicure, seemingly bored by the apocalypse unfolding around her. "I don't know why you're being so stubborn. Just postpone. Daddy can make a few calls, smooth things over with the press. We can do it next month or next season." Dominic looked at her. "Postpone? Victoria, if we postpone, the market sees weakness. The stock drops. Your father buys the controlling stake for pennies on the dollar. I know the game." Victoria smiled, a small, tight expression. "You're so cynical. I'm just trying to help. Clearly, this is too much for you to handle alone. Without Miranda, well, you're just a builder, aren't you, not a host." The doors to the conference room opened. Gary, the catering manager with the nervous toupee, shuffled in. He looked like he was walking to the gallows. Behind him trailed a line of servers carrying silver trays covered in domed lids. "Mr. Ashford," Gary squeaked. "MS. Langley, we have the tasting menu samples. As scheduled." Dominic pinched the bridge of his nose. "We don't have time for a tasting, Gary. We don't even have tables to serve the food on." "But it's the lobster risottos," Gary stammered. "They don't keep." "Fine," Dominic waved a hand dismissively. "Set them down, quickly." At the back of the line was Stella. She was exhausted. Her feet throbbed in the cheap, standard-issue black flats. The tray in her hand felt like it was made of lead. She had been up since 5 a.m., working a breakfast shift, and now she was here, walking into the lion's den. She kept her head down. Invisible, she told herself, be furniture. But it's hard to be furniture when the floor is your enemy. As the servers fanned out around the table, Stella moved toward Victoria. Her job was to offer the canapes. Simple, foolproof. She didn't see the extension cord. It was a thick, black cable snaking out from under the teleconferencing unit, taped down with duct tape that had lost its adhesive in the humidity. The toe of Stella's shoe caught the edge of the tape. Physics took over. Time seemed to slow down. It was a sensation Stella remembered from the Hamptons, the horrific clarity of the inevitable. She felt her balance tip forward. She felt the heavy silver tray leave her fingertips. She watched, helpless, as the domed lid slid off midair. 3 petite lobster risottos, swimming in a rich, saffron-infused cream sauce, launched themselves into the atmosphere. They didn't hit the floor. They hit Victoria Langley. The impact was wet and heavy. The risotto landed squarely on the lap of Victoria's pale lavender silk dress. The saffron sauce exploded like a yellow firework, splattering across her chest, her arms, and most tragically, her face. Silence. Absolute vacuum-sealed silence engulfed the room. For 1 second, nobody moved. The lobster sat mockingly on Victoria's knee. Then, the screaming started. You idiot, Victoria shrieked, jumping up. The risotto slid to the floor with a wet plop. My dress, this is vintage Valentino, you stupid, clumsy cow. Gary looked like he was having a cardiac event. I'm so sorry, Ms. Langley, I raise, what is wrong with you? Stella was already on her knees. It was instinct, the servant's reflex. Get down, clean up, disappear. I'm sorry, Stella gasped, grabbing napkins from the table, trying to dab at the sauce pooling on the carpet. I tripped. The cable was loose. I'm so sorry. Don't touch me. Victoria recoiled, kicking Stella's hand away. Get away from me, Dominic. Get this incompetent trash out of here. I want her fired. I want her sued. Dominic watched the scene with a look of profound weariness. He didn't look angry. He just looked done. Gary, Dominic said, his voice flat. Get your staff out. Take the food. We're done here. Yes, sir. Immediately, sir. Raise, you're done. Get out. Don't even clock out. Just go. Stella felt the tears prickling behind her eyes, not tears of sadness, tears of humiliation, the hot, stinging shame of being reduced to a clumsy cliché. She scrambled to gather the scattered silverware. She reached for a fork that had slid under the conference table, and that's when she saw it. Lying on the floor, half hidden by the table leg, was a binder. It wasn't one of the corporate binders. It was a distinct, chaotic notebook with a leather cover. Miranda's personal planner. It must have fallen when she ran out. It was open to the page marked Final Vendor Schedule. Stella's eyes, trained to absorb information in milliseconds, scanned the page. Her brain, which had been dormant and dull for 8 months, suddenly sparked to life. It was like an engine turning over. 0800 AM load-in. Florals, Tropical Dreams, LLC. 0800 AM load-in. Lighting rig Lumina Tech. 0800 AM load-in. Ice Sculptures. Wait, Stella whispered. What did you say? Gary hissed, grabbing her arm to pull her up. Let's go. Wait, Stella said louder, shaking him off. She stood up. She was covered in saffron sauce. Her hair had escaped its bun. She looked like a disaster, but she was holding the binder. You have a collision, Stella said. Her voice wasn't the voice of a waitress anymore. It was clear, sharp, authoritative. Dominic, who had been rubbing his temples, looked up. Excuse me. The schedule, Stella said, pointing at the open page. Miranda has the florists, the lighting crew, and the ice delivery all using the south loading dock at 8:00 a.m. Victoria scoffed, wiping sauce from her arm. Who cares? Security, remove her. The south dock only has 2 bays, Stella continued, ignoring Victoria and looking directly at Dominic. The lighting rig requires a scissor lift which blocks both bays for 90 minutes. If the ice arrives at 8:00, it will sit on the tarmac in 90-degree heat. By the time the rig moves, your ice sculptures will be puddles, and your flowers will be wilted. Silence returned to the room, but this was a different kind of silence. It wasn't shocked. It was attentive. Dominic narrowed his eyes. He walked around the table, stopping 3 feet from Stella. He looked at the sauce on her apron, then he looked at her eyes. Let me see that, he said. Stella handed him the binder. Dominic looked at the page. She's right, he murmured to Marcus. The load-in is stacked. It's a bottleneck. We would have lost the ice. That's not all, Stella said. The adrenaline was pumping now. She felt the old rhythm coming back. The puzzle-solving high. Look at the seating chart on the next page. Table 4 is next to the service entrance. You have the French ambassador seated there. The draft from the swinging doors will hit him every time a waiter walks by. He's 80 years old. He'll leave before the entree. Dominic flipped the page. He checked the floor plan. He looked back at Stella. And the acoustics, Stella added. She couldn't stop herself. You have the string quartet positioned under the HVAC vent. The humidity change will detune the cellos within 20 minutes. They'll sound like dying cats by the time the speeches start. Victoria stepped forward, her face flushed with rage. Dominic, are you seriously listening to the help? She threw food on me. She's probably making this up to save her miserable job. She's not making it up, Dominic said quietly. He closed the binder. He looked at Stella, really looked at her. For the first time, he didn't see a waitress. He saw the sharp intelligence behind the tired eyes. He saw the posture of someone who knew exactly where she stood in space, despite the earlier fall. "Who are you?" Dominic asked. Stella straightened her spine. She wiped a smudge of saffron from her cheek. "I'm Stella Reyes," she said. "I used to be an event coordinator, a good one. And if you keep this schedule, Mr. Ashford, your $2 million gala is going to be a very expensive disaster." "You're fired," Gary shouted, unable to read the room. "Reyes, get out." "Gary," Dominic said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Be quiet." Dominic looked at Victoria, who was fuming in her ruined dress. Then he looked at Marcus. "Get a mess. Langley a towel and call her a car," Dominic ordered. "Gary, take your team and leave the samples." "And her?" Gary pointed at Stella. Dominic turned back to Stella. A small, almost imperceptible spark of interest lit up his dark eyes. "She stays," Dominic said. "We have a schedule to fix." Stella felt the shift in the room's gravity. The air pressure changed. Victoria looked like she had been slapped. "Dominic, you can't be serious." "Go change, Victoria," Dominic said, not looking away from Stella. "I have work to do." As the room cleared out, Gary looking bewildered, Victoria storming off with a trail of threats, the other servers whispering, Stella stood alone in the center of the wreckage. She was trembling again. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the cold reality of what she had just done. She had humiliated a billionaire heiress. She had hijacked a meeting. She had possibly just lost her only source of income. But then Dominic Ashford sat on the edge of the mahogany table, right next to the spilled risotto. He didn't seem to care about his suit pants. He opened the binder. "The cello detuning," he said, his tone conversational, as if they weren't standing in a disaster zone. "How did you know that?" "Physics," Stella said, her voice steadying. "Wood expands with moisture. Your vents blow humid air. It's bad for instruments." Dominic nodded slowly. "And the loading dock, spatial awareness, 2 bays, 3 trucks. Math doesn't care about your budget." Dominic closed the binder with a snap. He stood up and walked toward her. He was tall, much taller than he looked on TV, and he smelled of sandalwood and rain. "You threw lobster on my fiancée," he said. "I tripped," Stella defended. "You have excellent aim," Dominic noted. Was that a ghost of a smile on his lips? It was gone before she could be sure. "My head of security tells me Miranda's files are gone. This binder, and whatever is in your head, is all we have." "I'm just a server, Mr. Ashford," Stella said, pulling back her defensive walls. "I pour drinks. I don't plan galas." "Not anymore," Dominic said. "Come to my office. We need to talk about your promotion." "I'm covered in sauce," Stella pointed out. Dominic looked her up and down. He didn't sneer. He didn't flinch. "Details," he said. "Competence is the only thing I care about right now. And you, Stella Reyes, seem to be the only person in this building who has any." He turned and walked toward the door. He didn't check to see if she was following. He knew she would. Stella looked at the spilled food on the floor. She looked at the door. She took a deep breath, stepped over the lobster, and followed the ice prince into the elevator. The fall was over. The climb was about to begin. The elevator ride to the penthouse took 40 seconds. It felt like 40 years. Stella stood in the corner of the brushed steel car, clutching her dirty apron like a security blanket. She smelled of saffron cream, old sweat, and shame. Beside her, Dominic Ashford stood perfectly still, checking emails on his phone, looking as crisp and untarnished as a freshly minted banknote. The doors slid open with a soft chime. Dominic's office was not an office. It was a command center. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a 360-degree view of Miami, the ocean, the bay, the city grid pulsing with traffic. The furniture was sparse, modern, and terrifyingly severe. A massive desk made of a single slab of black marble dominated the room. There were no family photos, no plants, no warmth. It was the habitat of a predator who didn't like distractions. "Sit," Dominic said, walking behind his desk and tossing his phone onto the marble. Stella hesitated, eyeing the pristine white leather chairs opposite him. "I'll stain the leather," she said. "Lobster bisque doesn't exactly blend with minimalist chic. It's Italian leather, Stella. It wipes clean. Sit down." She sat, or rather she perched on the edge of the seat, ready to bolt. Dominic didn't sit. He leaned against the front of his desk, crossing his arms over his chest. He studied her. It was an uncomfortable, dissecting gaze, like a biologist examining a particularly interesting specimen of bacteria. 500 guests, Dominic said suddenly. No preamble. Cocktail hour followed by a seated dinner. "What's your staffing ratio?" Stella blinked. It was a test. For a standard event, 1 server per 12 guests, she answered automatically, her brain shifting gears. For luxury service, 1 per 8, plus 1 busser for every 2 servers. And you need floating sommeliers if you're doing tableside wine service. Fire code capacity for the grand ballroom. 800 standing, 600 seated with a dance floor. 550 if you bring in the oversized floral installations your fiancé likes. Dominic's eyebrows twitched. Vegetarian options. "Never make it an afterthought," Stella said, her voice gaining strength. "If you serve a mushroom risotto as the only option, you're lazy. You need a protein-based vegan option, plated with the same height and visual weight as the steak, or the vegetarians feel like second-class citizens. And unhappy guests don't buy stocks." Dominic stared at her for a long moment. Then he pushed off the desk and walked around to his chair. "You're not a server," he stated. "I am currently a server," Stella corrected. "I have the badge and the minimum wage pay stub to prove it. You know what I mean." Dominic opened a drawer and pulled out a file. He slid it across the black marble. It stopped inches from Stella's hand. She looked down. It was a dossier, and on the cover was a photo of her face, taken from a Society page article about the Hamptons disaster. The headline was visible, "Wedding Planner from Hell." Stella felt the blood drain from her face. The confidence she had just built up evaporated instantly. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew who I was before I even walked into the conference room." "I recognized you," Dominic said calmly. "I have a memory for faces, and I read the industry reports. The Vance Holloway wedding. It was legendary." Stella stood up, her hands trembling. "If you brought me up here to humiliate me, Mr. Ashford, you can save your breath. I've heard it all. I'm incompetent. I'm a liability. I'm the girl who poisoned the bride." She turned toward the elevator. "I'll show myself out." "Sit down, Stella." His voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of an anchor. "I didn't say you were incompetent," Dominic said. "I said the wedding was legendary. I didn't say it was your fault." Stella stopped. She turned back slowly. "Excuse me." Dominic tapped the file. "I do my due diligence," he said. "When the story broke, everyone blamed you. But I was looking at hiring the same security firm for my hotels that the Holloway family used, so I pulled the insurance investigation report." He opened the file. "The refrigeration units were hacked remotely," Dominic read, scanning the page. "The IP address was traced to a burner phone, but the signal originated from a tower 2 miles away, and the florist." He admitted to the investigator, off the record, that he received a cash bonus to swap the peonies for lilies. He claimed he thought it was a surprise from the groom. Stella stared at him, her mouth slightly open. She had never seen this report. She had been fired before the investigation even started. "Someone targeted you," Dominic said, looking up. "Or they targeted the wedding, and you were the collateral damage. Either way, you were set up." Stella felt a lump form in her throat. For 8 months she had carried the weight of that failure. She had let it define her. She had let it convince her that she was broken. And here was the Ice Prince telling her the truth she had been too afraid to hope for. "Why?" Stella asked, her voice shaking. "Why would you tell me this?" "Because I need to know if you're a saboteur or just unlucky," Dominic said, closing the file. "I can work with unlucky. I can't work with sabotage." He leaned forward, locking eyes with her. My planner is gone. My fiancé is more interested in the press coverage than the logistics, and I have 48 hours to pull off an event that will determine the future of this company. He gestured to the chaotic city below. I don't need a server, Stella, and I don't need a yes man who is scared of Victoria. I need a general. I need someone who knows that wood expands in humidity and that loading docks have bottlenecks. I need you. Stella looked at him. She saw the desperation hidden behind the steel facade. He was offering her a lifeline, but it was a lifeline attached to a sinking ship. If I do this, Stella said, if I step in, Victoria will eat me alive. She hates me. Victoria is a bully, Dominic said. Bullies only respect strength. You stood up to her in the conference room. That's why I'm hiring you. And if it fails, Stella asked, if the sabotage continues, because if someone took out Miranda, they won't stop just because you hired a temp. If it fails, Dominic said, I take the fall, not you. I will publicly state that I brought you in as a consultant at the last minute and you did everything possible to save a sinking ship. He paused, then played his ace card. But if you succeed, if you pull this off, I will give you an exclusive interview with the Times. I will go on record saying that you are the best planner I have ever worked with. I will clear your name, Stella. I will give you your career back. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the pounding of Stella's heart. Her career back, her life back. No more trays, no more yes sir, no sir. No more hiding, but the risk, the danger. She looked at the dossier on the desk. She looked at the man offering her a deal with the devil. I need a change of clothes, Stella said. I can't command a staff looking like a risotto accident. Dominic let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. The corner of his mouth ticked up. I'll have a stylist here in 20 minutes. What size? Size 4, and I need comfortable shoes. I'm going to be running. Done. And I need full authority, Stella continued, stepping closer to the desk. She wasn't asking him, she was negotiating. Victoria doesn't get to override my decisions. If I say the linens are gray, they stay gray. If I say the band moves, they move. You back me up, publicly. Dominic stood up. He extended his hand across the black marble. You have my word. You run the show. I just pay the bills. Stella looked at his hand. It was large, well-manicured, steady. She reached out and took it. His grip was warm, firm, and electric. A current passed between them. A recognition of shared ambition of two people who refuse to lose. You have 48 hours, MS. Raise, Dominic said softly. 48 hours is plenty, Stella said, releasing his hand and squaring her shoulders. I once organized a bar mitzvah in a blackout with 3 hours' notice. Let's get to work. Dominic watched her turn away and start pacing the office, already muttering to herself about vendor lists and load-in times. For the first time in weeks, the knot of tension in his chest loosened slightly. He had expected her to be grateful. He had expected her to be meek. Instead, she was terrifying, and God help him, it was the most attractive thing he had seen in years. Mr. Ashford, Stella said, spinning around, her eyes blazing. Who has the master key to the service elevators? Security, Dominic answered. Get me one, she ordered. And get me coffee, black, the good stuff. We're going to war. Dominic reached for his phone to call his assistant. He realized with a jolt of amusement that he was taking orders from his waitress. Right away, he said, and he meant it. The hotel conference room had been transformed. Gone were the spilled risottos and the panic. In their place was a terrifyingly organized chaos. Stella had turned the space into a tactical operations center. Whiteboards lined the walls, covered in color-coded timelines. Blue for catering, red for security, green for VIP movements. It was 3 a.m. The gala was 36 hours away. Stella was standing on a chair, writing ice sculpture deadline, 14:00 in aggressive red marker on the highest board. She was wearing a borrowed, oversized white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, and a pair of tailored black trousers the stylist had rushed over. She looked like she had been living in this room for years. Dominic sat at the table watching her. He had a laptop open, ostensibly reviewing contracts, but mostly he was watching the way Stella raised dismantled problems that would have paralyzed a lesser team. "We have a problem with the oysters," Stella announced, capping the marker and jumping down from the chair with a thud. "What's wrong with the oysters?" Dominic asked, not looking up from his screen. "Supplier says the red tide in the Gulf has affected the harvest. They want a substitute with blue points from Connecticut." "Is that a problem?" "It is if you want Victoria to scream," Stella said, grabbing a lukewarm coffee. She specifically requested Kumamoto's. They are sweeter. Blue points are brinier. She'll say they taste like poor people ocean water. Dominic snorted, a genuine, unbidden sound of amusement. He looked up, surprised by his own laughter. "Poor people ocean water," he repeated. Her words, not mine. From her sweet 16 party. I have a vivid memory of her throwing a scallop at my head. Stella leaned over the table, bracing her hands on the wood. She was close enough that Dominic could smell the faint scent of soap and coffee. The saffron smell was gone. "I need authorization to charter a courier from the West Coast," Stella said. "I can get Kumamoto's from Washington State, but they have to fly out in 4 hours. It'll cost an extra $3,000. "Do it," Dominic said. "I'll pay $10,000 if it keeps Victoria from throwing mollusks." "Done." Stella typed a text on her phone. She paused, looking at him. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the servers in the corner. It was that strange, intimate hour of the night where hierarchies dissolve. "You don't like her," Stella observed. It wasn't a question. Dominic leaned back in his chair. "I appreciate her. She's strategic." "She's a nightmare," Stella corrected. "A strategic nightmare." "The merger requires the Langley investment," Dominic said, his voice dropping to that guarded CEO tone. "This industry is eating itself, consolidating. If I don't expand the Ashford brand now, we get acquired. And if we get acquired, they strip the assets, they fire the staff, they turn my hotels into generic boxes." He looked at Stella. "I have 3,000 employees, Stella, housekeepers, concierges, chefs. Their pensions, their health care. It all depends on me staying in control. Victoria's father guarantees that control." Stella studied his face. She saw the weight he was carrying. It wasn't greed, it was responsibility. "So you marry the dragon to save the village," she said softly. "Something like that." "That's very noble," Stella said, turning back to her whiteboard. "And very sad. It's business," Dominic said. "Romance is a luxury I can't afford." "Everyone can afford romance, Dominic," she said, using his first name for the first time. "It's the cheapest thing in the world. It just costs you your pride." The door opened. Marcus Webb walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Interrupting something?" Marcus asked, eyeing the tension in the room. "Just debating the ROI of love," Stella said dryly. "What do you have, Marcus?" Marcus placed a tablet on the table. "I traced the last ping from Miranda's phone before she went dark," Marcus said. "It was in a parking garage, but before she tossed it, she received a wire transfer." "How much?" Dominic asked. 50,000 from a shell corporation in the Caymans." "Standard payoff," Dominic muttered. "But here's the kicker," Marcus swiped the screen. "I dug into the shell corp. It's buried deep layers of LLCs, but the initial funding, it came from an account linked to Cole Hospitality Group." Stella froze. She saw Dominic's face transform. The weariness vanished. In its place was a cold, sharp fury. His jaw locked. His eyes turned to steel. "Preston," Dominic hissed. Stella stepped forward. "Who is Preston Cole?" "My former partner," Dominic said, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "We started this company together. 5 years ago, he tried to sell our user data to a marketing firm behind my back. I bought him out. I kicked him out. He swore he would burn me down. And now he's paying your wedding planner to sabotage your engagement," Stella concluded. "He knows the Langley deal is my lifeline." Dominic stood up, pacing the room. If this gala fails, if the Langleys walk, Preston is waiting in the wings to buy the company for scraps. He stopped and looked at Stella. This isn't just a party anymore, Dominic said. It's a siege. Stella looked at the timeline on the wall, the flowers, the ice, the oysters. Every detail was a potential weak point. Every vendor could be bought. She felt a surge of protectiveness, not for the billionaire, but for the man who was trying to save his employees. Okay, Stella said. If it's a siege, we need to fortify. She grabbed a black marker and drew a circle around the staff check-in time. Marcus, she commanded. I want background checks on every single temp staffer coming in tomorrow. If they have a connection to Quoll Hospitality, they don't get in the building. On it, Marcus nodded, clearly impressed. And Dominic, she turned to him. You need to play the happy groom. If Preston is watching, and he is, he wants to see you sweating. Don't let him smile, look in love, make him think his plan failed. I'm not very good at acting, Dominic admitted. Stella looked at him. She thought about the way he had looked at her earlier, the way he had defended her. Just look at Victoria, she said, her voice tightening slightly, and pretend she's someone you actually respect. I'll try, Dominic said. He walked over to where she stood. He was close again, too close. You're good at this, he said quietly, leading. I told you, Stella said, looking up at him, refusing to back down. I'm a general, I just didn't have an army. You have one now, Dominic said. For a second, nobody moved. The air between them crackled with electricity, thick enough to choke on. It was the danger of the foxhole, the bond forged in the face of a common enemy. Then Stella's phone buzzed loudly on the table. She broke the gaze. She looked at the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. Nice shirt. Does it come with a severance package? Watch your back, Stella. Stella felt a chill run down her spine. She looked up at the glass walls of the conference room. It was night. The windows were black mirrors. Anyone could be watching from the darkness outside. What is it? Dominic asked, sensing her fear. Stella locked her phone. Nothing, she lied. Just the oyster guy confirming the flight. She wasn't going to tell him, not yet. She wasn't going to be the reason he lost focus. She picked up her marker. Back to work, she said, her voice steady. We have a war to win. 24 hours before the gala. If the war room was the brain of the operation, the hotel rooftop was its soul, or perhaps its lungs. It was the only place where the air felt thin enough to breathe. Stella leaned against the glass railing of the helipad, 50 stories above the neon grid of Miami. The wind whipped at her hair, pulling strands loose from her severe crisis mode bun. She held a plastic cup of lukewarm water like it was a lifeline. Below her, the city was a beast of light and noise. Above her, the stars were fighting a losing battle against the light pollution. You're hiding, a voice said from the shadows. Stella didn't jump. She was too tired to jump. She just turned her head. Dominic Ashford emerged from the darkness near the access door. He had shed his suit jacket. His tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck like a dismantled noose. He held 2 crystal tumblers of amber liquid. I'm not hiding, Stella said, turning back to the view. I'm performing a structural analysis of the skyline. Liar, Dominic said, moving to stand beside her, offered her one of the glasses. Drink. It's older than both of us combined. Stella took the glass. I'm on the clock, Mr. Ashford. I'm the boss. I'm authorizing a 15-minute recess. Drink. She took a sip. The whiskey burned pleasantly, a warm fire in her chest that chased away the air-conditioned chill. Why are you hiding? Stella asked, looking at him sideways. Shouldn't you be downstairs practicing your I'm so in love smile for the rehearsal dinner? Dominic let out a short, dry laugh. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes fixed on a construction crane in the distance. I don't need to practice, he said. I'm very good at lying, Stella. It's a prerequisite for the job. That's depressing. It's realistic. He swirled the liquid in his glass. My father taught me that emotions are just variables. If you can control the variables, you control the outcome. And Victoria, Stella asked boldly, is she a variable? Dominic went quiet. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the wind. Victoria is a necessity, he said finally. See that empty lot down there, the dark square near the port? Stella squinted. Yes. That was supposed to be a luxury condo complex. High rent, exclusive. I bought it 3 months ago. I canceled the condos. Bad business move, Stella noted. Horrible, Dominic agreed. My board wanted to crucify me, but I'm not building condos. I'm building a community hub, vocational training center on the ground floor, subsidized housing for hospitality workers on the upper floors, a hotel that actually serves the people who keep the city running, not just the tourists who visit it. Stella stared at him. She looked at the dark square, then back at the man in the $5,000 suit. Why? She asked. Because my mother was a housekeeper, Dominic said quietly. Before she met my father, before the money, she cleaned rooms at the Motel 6 by the airport. She worked 16-hour days so I could have new shoes for school. She died 5 years ago. She never got to see me build anything that mattered. He turned to Stella. His eyes were vulnerable, stripped of the CEO armor. The Langley investment funds that project, he said. Victoria's father signs the check and I break ground next week. If I don't marry her, the bank takes the land, and it becomes just another condo for rich people who serve nobody. Stella felt something crack in her chest. The cynicism she had built up against him, against all rich people, fractured. He wasn't marrying for power. He was selling himself to build a legacy for a woman who cleaned toilets. So you're a martyr, Stella whispered. A billionaire martyr. I'm a builder, Stella, he said, stepping closer. The wind blew his tie against her arm. I just want to build something that lasts. I get it, she said, her voice soft. I grew up in a house where everything was temporary. The rent, the electricity, even the furniture was rented. That's why I plan events. Because you like parties. Because for 5 hours I control the universe, Stella said, looking up at him. I decide the lighting. I decide the music. I create a perfect world where nothing breaks and nobody leaves and everything is beautiful. Fake, but it's mine. Dominic looked at her. He really looked at her. It's not fake, he said. What you did downstairs, that wasn't fake, that was brilliant. He reached out. His hand hovered for a second, then his fingers brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was warm, electric. Stella stopped breathing. The world narrowed down to the space between them. The city noise faded. The wind stopped. There was only the scent of sandalwood and the heat of his body. Dominic leaned in. His eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, asking a silent question. Stella didn't pull away. She leaned forward just an inch. The door to the roof slammed open. Dominic. The spell shattered like a dropped champagne flute. Dominic pulled back instantly, the mask slamming back onto his face. Stella took a stumbling step backward, nearly spilling her whiskey. Victoria stood in the doorway. She was wearing a silk robe and a look of predatory suspicion. I've been looking everywhere for you, Victoria said, her voice shrill. She walked onto the deck, her eyes darting between Dominic and Stella. And here you are, drinking with the help. We were discussing strategy, Dominic said, his voice cool and detached. Stella was briefing me on the run-of show. Victoria laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. Strategy, in the dark, with whiskey. She walked up to Stella, invading her personal space. You're very dedicated, aren't you? MS Ray's working so hard for your redemption. I should go, Stella said, setting the glass down on the railing. I have to check the load-in schedule. Yes, Victoria said, smiling sweetly. You should. Go do your job, Stella. Leave the important conversations to the people who actually belong here. Stella looked at Dominic. He didn't look at her. He was looking at Victoria, his jaw clenched, his eyes dead. He had gone back to being the builder, the martyr. Good night, Mr. Ashford, Stella said. Good night, Stella, he replied. He sounded like a stranger. Stella walked past Victoria, who smelled of expensive perfume and malice. She reached the door and pushed it open, stepping out of the cool night air and back into the suffocating reality of the hotel. She touched her ear where his fingers had been. It still burned. Stupid. She whispered to herself in the stairwell. Stupid, stupid, stupid. The morning of the gala arrived not with a bang, but with a terrifying, ominous silence. It was 7:00 a.m., the calm before the storm. Stella stood in the center of the grand ballroom. It was breathtaking. The floral installations, massive arches of white orchids and hydrangeas, were halfway done. The tables were set with crystal that caught the morning light filtering through the atrium. For a moment it was perfect, and then her walkie-talkie screamed. Stella, loading Dock B, now. It was Gary. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. Stella sprinted. She ran through the service corridors, her flats slapping against the concrete. She burst onto the loading dock, blinking in the harsh sunlight. A delivery truck was idling there. The back gate was open. Gary was standing next to a pallet of linens, holding a tablecloth. He looked like he was going to cry. "What is it?" Stella demanded, breathless. "Are they late?" "No," Gary squeaked. "They're here, but look." He held up the cloth. It wasn't platinum gray. It wasn't dove gray. It was red, bright, violent, fire engine red. "What is this?" Stella asked, grabbing the fabric. It felt cheap, polyester. "I ordered Belgian linen, gray. This looks like a tablecloth for a pizza parlor." "The driver says this is what was on the invoice," Gary said, pointing to the paperwork. "He says the order was changed yesterday at 4:00 p.m. "Changed by whom?" "By you," voice said. The driver, a burly man with a clipboard, tapped the signature line. "Order modified by Stella Ray's, electronic signature." Stella stared at the digital signature. It was a perfect copy of her own. A cold wave of déjà vu washed over her. The Hamptons, the Lilies, the signature she didn't sign. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Stella, Leo, the bartender, ran onto the dock. "We have a problem at the bar." Stella spun around. "What?" "The champagne." Leo panted. "The truck arrived. It's empty. Empty. The manifest says the shipment was rerouted to a warehouse in Orlando due to a customs hold," Leo said. "We have 500 guests arriving in 10 hours and 0 bubbles. We have tap water and 3 bottles of cooking sherry." Stella felt the world tilting. The pattern was undeniable. The linens, the logistics, the digital impersonation. Someone was playing her greatest hits of failure. "It's the Hamptons," she murmured. "They're doing the Hamptons again." Her phone buzzed. Text message. "Unknown number red looks good on you, or maybe you prefer orange. Like a jumpsuit. You have 5 hours to quit." Stella dropped the red tablecloth. Her hands were shaking, but this time it wasn't fear. It was rage. "Gary," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Get every server to the laundry room. We are bleaching these. I don't care if we have to use industrial acid. Make them white. But go," she roared. Gary scrambled. "Leo," she turned to the bartender. "Call the local distributors. Call every liquor store in South Beach. Tell them Dominic Ashford is buying their entire stock of Youth Clickwad at retail price plus 20%. Use the emergency corporate card. Send the bellhops to pick it up in Ubers if you have to." On it, Leo ran. Stella stood alone on the dock. She needed answers. "Marcus," she shouted into her radio. "War room, now." 10 minutes later, in the conference room, Marcus Webb looked at the red tablecloth sample and the text message on Stella's phone. "It's a digital spoof," Marcus said, typing furiously on his laptop. "They hacked the vendor portal using a keylogger, probably installed weeks ago." "It's Preston Cole," Stella said, pacing. "It has to be. He's trying to make me look incompetent so Dominic fires me and the gala collapses." "I traced the champagne reroute," Marcus said. "The warehouse in Orlando. It's owned by a subsidiary of Cole Hospitality." "He stole our champagne," Stella said, incredulous. "He literally stole it." "He's trying to break you, Stella," Marcus said, looking up. "He knows you're the glue holding this together. If you crack, Dominic cracks." Stella stopped pacing. She looked at the whiteboard, now covered in new crisis markers. "I won't crack," she said. But then, the door opened. Dominic walked in. He looked refreshed, shaved, and terrifyingly hopeful. He was holding 2 coffees. "Good morning," he said, smiling at Stella. I heard we have a linen situation. Gary said something about bleach. Stella froze. She looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at her. The choice hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Tell him that his former partner is dismantling his life piece by piece. Tell him that she is being targeted. Risk him panicking. Risk him canceling the event. Risk him losing the merger, or fix it. Fix it in the shadows. Be the general he hired her to be. It's under control, Stella said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack her face. Just a shipping error. We're pivoting to white. It'll look crisp, modern. Dominic studied her. He stepped closer, searching her eyes. And the champagne? He asked. I saw Leo running through the lobby like he was being chased by bees. Inventory mix-up, Stella lied smoothly. We're sourcing locally, supporting small businesses. Dominic paused. He looked at the phone in her hand, which she was gripping so tight her knuckles were white. Stella, he said softly, are you sure that's all it is? Stella swallowed the lump of fear in her throat. I promised you a gala, Dominic, she said. I'm going to give you a gala, just trust me. Dominic held her gaze for a long second. He knew she was holding something back, but he also remembered the moment on the rooftop, the shared ambition. I trust you, he said. He handed her the coffee. Don't burn yourself, he said. He turned and left the room. As soon as the door clicked shut, Stella collapsed into a chair. She looked at Marcus. We have 10 hours, she said. Find out how they got into the system. And Marcus. Yeah. Find out who Victoria is texting, because she knew about the linens before I did. Marcus's eyes widened. How do you know? Because she's wearing a red scarf today, Stella said grimly, and she hates red. The game was rigged. The enemy was inside the house, and the clock was ticking down to 0. 6 hours. That was all that remained. Downstairs, the Ashford Grand was buzzing with the frantic energy of a hive under attack. Bleach fumes wafted from the laundry room where Gary was waging a holy war against red polyester. Leo was coordinating an illicit champagne transfer in the loading dock involving 3 Ubers and a very confused bellhop. But on the 42nd floor, inside the presidential suite, the air was still. Dead still. Stella stood outside the double mahogany doors. She smoothed the front of her black trousers. Her hands were trembling, but she balled them into fists until her nails dug into her palms. She had Marcus's intel. She had the red scarf sighting. She had a gut feeling that was screaming louder than the fire alarm. She knocked. Come in. Victoria's voice floated through the wood. Stella pushed the door open. The suite was a sprawling landscape of cream velvet and gold accents. It smelled of expensive lilies, stargazers. Stella noted with a jolt of nausea and hairspray. Victoria Langley sat at the vanity table, surrounded by a small army of stylists. One was curling her hair. Another was buffing her nails. A third was holding up diamond earrings for her approval. She looked like a queen preparing for a coronation or an execution. Victoria saw Stella in the mirror. Her blue eyes narrowed, then sparked with amusement. Leave us, Victoria commanded. But MS. Langley, the hair isn't set, the stylist began. Out. Victoria snapped. Now, the stylists scattered like frightened birds, gathering their tools and fleeing the room. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving Stella and Victoria alone in the silence. Victoria spun her chair around. She was wearing a silk robe in that violent shade of red, the same red as the tablecloths. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a signature. To what do I owe the pleasure, MS? Raise. Victoria asked, picking up a glass of sparkling water. Did you come to tell me you finally quit, or did you spill something else on my property? I know it was you, Stella said. She didn't have time for games. Victoria raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. You'll have to be more specific. I do a lot of things. The linens, Stella said, stepping further into the room. The champagne, the hacked vendor portal, you're working with Preston Cole, you're sabotaging your own engagement party. Victoria took a slow sip of water. She didn't look shocked. She looked bored. That's a very serious accusation, Stella. You have proof. or just the hysterical ramblings of a disgraced party planner. I saw the text messages on Miranda's phone before she disappeared. Stella lied. It was a bluff, a dangerous one. And I know about the red scarf you're wearing, the evidence. Victoria laughed. It was a cold, tinkling sound that chilled the room. You're smarter than you look, Victoria admitted, standing up and tightening the sash of her robe. But you're missing the point. I'm not sabotaging the party. I'm managing the outcome. By destroying Dominic's reputation. By making him need me, Victoria corrected sharply. She walked over to the window, looking out at the ocean. Dominic is arrogant. He thinks he can build his little community hotels and save the world without my father's money. He needs to be humbled. He needs to see that without the Langley influence, his world falls apart. When this gala fails, he'll be desperate, and a desperate husband is a compliant husband. Stella stared at her. The cruelty was so casual, so calculated. He trusts you, Stella whispered. He actually thinks you're on his side. He doesn't trust anyone, Victoria scoffed. He uses people just like he's using you. Victoria turned back to the vanity and picked up her phone. She swiped the screen and held it out to Stella. Look. Stella hesitated, then looked. It was a series of photos. Paparazzi shots, high resolution. Dominic on a yacht with a supermodel. Dominic at a gala whispering to a French actress. Dominic leaving a hotel room with a young intern. They looked intimate, damning. He has a type, Victoria said, her voice dripping with false pity. The help. The underdog. He loves to swoop in and play the hero. He picks up strays, Stella. He makes them feel special. He makes them feel seen. Stella felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She thought about the rooftop, the way he had touched her hair. It's not fake, he had said. And then Victoria continued, swiping to the next photo, Dominic walking away from a crying woman looking completely indifferent. He gets bored, or the business deal closes, and he discards them. Victoria stepped closer, her perfume suffocatingly sweet. You think you're his partner right now. You think you're saving him, Victoria sneered. You're just the latest project, a distraction to get him through a stressful week. When this is over, he'll marry me because I am his equal, and you'll just be the hired help who knew too much. Stella stared at the photo of the crying woman. It felt like looking into a mirror of her future. Why are you showing me this? Stella asked, her voice trembling slightly. Because I'm offering you a mercy kill, Victoria said. Walk away now. Leave the hotel. Let the gala fail. I'll blame it on Miranda. You go back to your little life, and I'll make sure Preston leaves you alone. She leaned in, her eyes hard as diamonds. But if you stay, if you fix this, I will destroy you. I will dig up the Hamptons. I will invent new scandals. I will make sure you never work a day in this industry again. I will bury you so deep, Stella, you'll need a mining permit to see the sun. The room fell silent. Stella looked at the woman in the red robe. She looked at the photos. She felt the fear, cold and sharp, trying to take root in her chest. It would be so easy to leave, to run, to go back to being invisible. But then she remembered the loading dock. She remembered Dominic handing her the coffee. I trust you. You're wrong about him, Stella said quietly. Am I? Victoria challenged. Yes, Stella said, lifting her chin. And you're wrong about me. Excuse me. You think you can bury me. Stella stepped closer, invading Victoria's space for the first time. I've been burying myself for 8 months, Victoria. I've been living in the dirt. I know exactly how to survive down there. Stella turned toward the door. But you've never been dirty in your life. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in my world. You're making a mistake. Victoria shrieked, her composure cracking. I will ruin you. Stella opened the door. She looked back one last time. Maybe, Stella said, but at least I won't be wearing polyester while I do it. She slammed the door. 3 hours. The countdown clock in the war room was a red, pulsing eye, mocking everyone who looked at it. Stella was moving through the grand ballroom like a hurricane. Table 12 is crooked, she shouted, pointing. Align it with the chandelier. The bleach smell. Is it gone? Mostly. Gary yelled back, sniffing a freshly whitened tablecloth. We masked it with citrus oil. Now it just smells like a very clean lemon. Acceptable, Stella pivoted, Leo champagne status. Arriving at the North Dock in 10 minutes. Leo radioed back, it's warm though. Get the blast chillers from the pastry kitchen. We have 20 minutes to get it to 40 degrees. Go. She was on fire. She was solving problems before they happened. She was the General Dominic needed. But inside, she was bleeding. Victoria's words were echoing in her head like a poison mantra. He picks up strays. He gets bored. He discards them. She tried to push it down to focus on the floral arch being erected by the stage, but the doubt was a heavy stone in her gut. Stella. A hand grabbed her elbow, gentle but firm. She spun around. Dominic was there. He was dressed for the gala, a tuxedo that was tailored to within an inch of its life, velvet lapels, a black bow tie that was currently undone. He looked devastating and he looked worried. You've been avoiding me, Dominic said. I've been working, Stella said, pulling her arm away. She couldn't look at him, not with the photos burning in her memory. The flowers were late. The linens needed bleaching. I'm busy. Stella, Dominic stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Stop. I can't stop. The guests are arriving in. Stop. He took her shoulders. His hands were warm through the thin silk of her blouse. You're vibrating, he said softly. And you haven't looked me in the eye since you came down from Victoria's suite. What did she say to you? Stella looked at his chest, at the crisp white pleats of his shirt. She told me to quit, Stella said. She threatened to ruin me. I expected that, Dominic said. But that's not why you're upset. You're not scared of Victoria. What else? Stella closed her eyes. She shouldn't ask. It was unprofessional. It was personal. But she had to know. She showed me pictures, Stella whispered. Dominic went still. What pictures? You, she said, finally looking up. Her eyes were wet, betraying her. With other women, models, actresses, she said. She said I'm just another project. A stray dog you picked up to feel good about yourself. And that when the gala is over, you'll get bored and throw me away. Dominic's face darkened. A flash of genuine hurt crossed his eyes, followed by a surge of anger directed upward toward the penthouse suite. Show me, he demanded. I don't have them, she described them. A yacht, a blonde model, Stella recited, the images seared into her brain. A gala with a redhead, a hotel hallway with a brunette who was crying. Dominic let out a harsh, incredulous breath. He ran a hand over his face, then looked back at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. The yacht, Dominic said clearly, was a photo shoot for the Ashford Resort in Cabo. The model is my cousin, Alina. She's gay, Stella. She was telling me about her engagement. Stella blinked. Oh, the redhead, he continued, ticking them off on his fingers. That's the mayor of Chicago. We were discussing zoning permits for the new build. She's 60 years old. It was a bad angle. And the crying woman, Stella asked, her voice small. In the hotel hallway, Dominic's expression softened. The anger faded, replaced by a deep sadness. That was Miranda, he said. 3 years ago, her husband had just filed for divorce. She had nowhere to go. I gave her the key to a suite so she didn't have to sleep in her car. I was walking away to give her privacy. Stella stared at him. The pieces clicked into place. The truth rang clear as a bell. Victoria had twisted acts of kindness into evidence of cruelty. She lied. Stella breathed. She twisted everything. That is what she does, Dominic said. He stepped closer, eliminating the distance between them. But she was right about one thing. Stella's heart hammered. What? You are a project, Dominic said, but not a charity case. You are the most competent, infuriating, brilliant partner I have ever had. And I don't get bored of competence, Stella. I get addicted to it. He reached out and took her hand. He didn't just hold it, he laced his fingers through hers, a gesture of intimacy that felt more scandalous than a kiss. I'm not discarding you, he said, his voice low and rough. When this night is over, I want you to stay. I want you to run everything, events, logistics, my life, if you want it. Stella looked at him. She saw the truth in his obsidian eyes. He wasn't the Ice Prince. He was just a man who had been surrounded by snakes for so long he had forgotten what warmth felt like. "Okay," Stella whispered. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "But if you want me to run your life, we need to discuss your tie. It's crooked." Dominic laughed. It was a sound of pure relief. "Fix it," he said. Stella reached up. She adjusted the black silk, her knuckles grazing his jawline. His skin was warm. He leaned into her touch just for a second. "So," Stella said, tightening the knot. "Victoria thinks she's won. She thinks I'm rattled. She thinks you're clueless." "Let's keep it that way," Dominic said, his eyes hardening with resolve. "Let her walk onto that stage thinking she owns the room. And then, Dominic said, we introduce her to the consequences of her actions." "I have the audio files from Miranda," Stella said. "Marcus recovered them 10 minutes ago. Voice mails from Preston, and one from Victoria. Perfect. And I have the receipts for the red linen," Stella added, linked to her personal credit card. "She got sloppy." "She got arrogant," Dominic corrected. "She thought we were beneath her." He stepped back, smoothing his jacket. The CEO mask was back in place, but this time Stella knew what was behind it. "Are you ready, General?" Dominic asked. Stella looked at the ballroom. The flowers were perfect. The tables were aligned. The champagne was chilling. She looked at the man who had given her a second chance when the world had written her off. "I was born ready," Stella said. She tapped her earpiece. "All stations," she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. "Doors open in 10 minutes. Lights to 50%. Cue the music. Let's give them a show." Upstairs, Victoria Langley was slipping into a silver gown, checking her reflection one last time. She smiled at herself, imagining the moment Dominic would announce their engagement, binding his company to her father's money forever. She didn't know that downstairs the trap was set. She didn't know that the help she had mocked was currently holding the detonator. And she certainly didn't know that the man she planned to control had just fallen in love with the woman she tried to destroy. The music started. The doors opened. The 11th hour was over. Midnight was coming. The Ashford Grand Ballroom was no longer a room. It was a galaxy. 500 of the world's wealthiest people were packed into a space that smelled of white orchids, vintage champagne, and money. The air shimmered with the soft clink of crystal and the hum of gossip. Stella stood in the shadows of the tech booth, her headset on, watching the monitor screens like a hawk. "Cue the lights," she whispered into the mic. "Bring the house down to 30%. Spot on the podium." On the stage, the lights dimmed. The crowd hushed. This was the moment. The $2 million moment. Dominic walked onto the stage. The spotlight caught him, turning his tuxedo into a silhouette of absolute power. He looked calm. Only Stella, watching on the high-definition monitor, could see the slight tension in his jaw. Victoria Langley stood just off stage, beaming. She was radiant in silver, looking every inch the billionaire's wife. She was already mentally redecorating the penthouse. "Good evening," Dominic's voice boomed through the speakers, rich and steady. "Thank you all for being here. Tonight is a celebration of the future of Ashford hospitality, and the future of this family." Applause rippled through the room. Victoria took a step forward, ready for her cue. "For months," Dominic continued, "I have been searching for a partner, someone who shares my vision, someone who understands that legacy isn't about what you own, but what you build." He paused. He looked toward the wing where Victoria was standing. She smiled, a predatory, triumphant smile. "But sometimes," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, "building a future requires tearing down the lies of the past." Victoria's smile faltered. "Tonight was supposed to be an engagement announcement," Dominic said. The crowd leaned in. "And it is, but not the one you expect." He gestured to the tech booth. He looked directly into the camera lens, looking directly at Stella. "Play it," Dominic said. Stella hit the button. The massive screens behind Dominic, which had been displaying looping logos of the Ashford brand, suddenly went black. Then an audio waveform appeared. A voice filled the ballroom, clear, high-pitched, unmistakable. I don't care about the cost, Preston. Just make sure the flowers are wrong. Make sure the food is late. I want him panicked. I want him to think his precious little empire is crumbling without my daddy's money." The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Victoria froze mid-step. Her face went ashen. Then a second voice on the recording, a male voice, rougher, and the planner, Miranda. Victoria's voice again. "Pay her off. Get her out of town. Blame it on the new girl, the waitress. No one will believe her anyway. She's nobody." The audio cut. Silence. Absolute deafening silence. Dominic turned to Victoria. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "You're right, Victoria," Dominic said into the microphone. "She was nobody until she saved me from you." Victoria finally moved. She rushed the stage, her face twisted in a mask of fury. "This is fake," she screamed, her voice cracking without the microphone. "This is a deep fake. He's lying. He's trying to steal my family's money. The money trail has already been sent to the SEC and the FBI," Dominic said calmly, "along with the receipts for the red linens you bought with your personal card. You really should use cash for sabotage, Victoria. It leaves less of a paper trail." He turned back to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, there will be no merger tonight. The Ashford Community Project will proceed independently." He looked up at the tech booth again. "And I would like to thank the person who actually made tonight possible. The person who fixed the flowers, sourced the champagne, and reminded me what integrity looks like. MS. Stellar rays." The spotlight swung. It cut through the darkness and hit the tech booth. Stella froze. She wasn't wearing a ball gown. She was wearing her headset and her general clothes. She looked terrified. But then someone started clapping. It was the French ambassador, the one Stella had moved away from the drafty door. Then the mayor of Chicago joined in. Then the investors. Within seconds, the room was thunderous. Victoria stood alone on the stage, a silver statue of ruin. Security guards, led by Marcus, were already moving toward her discreetly but firmly. Preston Cole was being intercepted near the exit. Dominic looked up at Stella in the booth. He winked. Stella took off her headset. She looked at the monitor, at the chaos, at the victory. She didn't smile. She just took a deep breath. The war was over. The general had won. The adrenaline crash was real. 2 hours later, the ballroom was empty. The guests had left, buzzing with the scandal of the decade. The police had taken statements. Victoria Langley had left through the back loading dock, hiding her face under a coat, a fitting exit for someone who lived for appearances. Stella sat on a stainless steel prep table in the main kitchen. She was dangling her legs, eating a lukewarm Kumamoto oyster. It was quiet. The hum of the refrigerators was the only sound. "I saved you one," a voice said. Dominic walked in. He had lost the bow tie. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. He carried 2 glasses of champagne, the good stuff, the stuff Leo had rescued. "You saved me a lot more than an oyster," Stella said, taking the glass. Dominic leaned against the counter opposite her. He looked tired but lighter. The weight of the world was gone from his shoulders. "The stock is going to tank tomorrow," he said cheerfully. "The market hates uncertainty." "You just publicly dumped an heiress and accused her of corporate espionage," Stella said. "I think tank is an understatement. You might want to buy a helmet." "Let it tank," Dominic shrugged. "I'll buy back the shares. I'll rebuild. It might take 5 years instead of 2, but at least I'll own it." He took a sip of champagne. "I couldn't have done it without you, Stella, and I don't just mean the logistics." "You had the evidence," Stella said. "You could have played the tape without me." "I could have," Dominic agreed. "But I wouldn't have had the courage to look at the wreckage and see a foundation. That's what you taught me. That disaster is just a logistics problem waiting to be solved." He set his glass down and stepped between her knees, entering her space. This time, there was no Victoria to interrupt, no crisis to manage. "So," Dominic said softly, "the job is done, the contract is fulfilled, you're free to go." Stella looked at him. She thought about her apartment in Little Havana. She thought about the interview Dominic had promised her with the Times. She could go anywhere, New York, London, Paris. I don't want to go, Stella whispered. Good, Dominic said, because I have a counteroffer. Is it another 48-hour crisis? No, Dominic smiled. It's a permanent position. Head of events for the entire Ashford Group, global creative control, and a significant raise. Is that all? Stella asked, her heart pounding against her ribs. Dominic looked at her lips. No, he said. There's a signing bonus. He leaned in. The kiss wasn't like the ones in the movies. It wasn't fireworks. It was better. It was the feeling of finally coming home. It tasted of expensive champagne and exhaustion and absolute, unshakable trust. Stella wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, erasing the last of the distance between the server and the CEO. I accept, she murmured against his mouth. The job? Dominic asked, breathless. The job, Stella smiled, and the bonus. Definitely the bonus. 6 months later, the Miami sun was shining, but this time it didn't feel oppressive. It felt like a spotlight. A crowd had gathered in front of a renovated building in the warehouse district. It wasn't a glass tower. It was brick and warm wood and covered in vertical gardens. The sign above the door read, Ashford Community House. Stella stood by the podium, checking the microphone. She wore a tailored cream suit that screamed boss. Her headset was on, but she wasn't panicking. She was conducting. Music cue in 5, she said calmly into the mic. Catering, stand by for the ribbon cutting. Dominic stood next to her. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at her. You know, he whispered, leaning in, you're terrifying when you're in charge. I'm always in charge, Dominic, she smirked. You just sign the checks. He laughed, grabbing her hand and squeezing it. Ready? He asked. Always. They walked out to the ribbon together. The press cameras flashed, not for a scandal, but for a success story. As the scissors cut the red ribbon, a nice, symbolic end to the red linen fiasco, Stella felt a vibration in her pocket. She checked her phone. It was a text from Dominic, even though he was standing right next to her. Text message, Dominic rooftop. 10 minutes. I have a question, and it's not about oysters. Stella looked up at him. He winked. 10 minutes later, on the roof of the new community center, surrounded by the garden she had helped design, Dominic Ashford got down on one knee. He didn't have a ring. He held out a small 3D printed model of a house with a big kitchen and a wraparound porch. I'm a builder, Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion. I build things to last, but a building is just a shell until someone makes it a home. He looked up at her, his eyes shining. Stella Reyes, will you build a life with me? Stella looked at the man who had seen her when she was invisible, the man who had trusted her with his legacy. Only if I get to pick the linens, she said, tears streaming down her face. Platinum gray, Dominic promised. Only the best. Yes, Stella said. Yes, yes, yes. He stood up and kissed her right there under the Miami sun as the city bustled below them, a chaotic, beautiful mess that they would navigate together. Some people say that disaster leaves a scar, that once you fall, you never truly get back up. But Stella knew better. Sometimes the fall is just gravity's way of putting you exactly where you're supposed to be. And sometimes the backup plan becomes the main event.